I always believed that the safest place in the world was behind my easel, where silence hummed through paintbrush bristles, and the world outside my studio windows stayed blurred, distant, and harmless. My name is Alara. I painted people for a living, faces I'd never meet again, eyes that never spoke, lips that never whispered my name. My studio was tucked above an old bakery on the corner of 3rd and Haven Street, its air perpetually scented with sugar and turpentine. The most dangerous thing I had ever encountered was a stubborn color that refused to blend. Until that night. It started like every other late commission. A man's voice on the phone, low and deliberate, asking for a private portrait. His assistant handled everything: the payment, the schedule, even the delivery of the canvas. Nothing unusual, except the warning she slipped in at the end. "He values privacy," she said. "He doesn't sit for just anyone." I remember thinking it was a strange thing to say about a man wanting his portrait painted. But money was money, and his offer could cover my rent for months. He arrived just after midnight. The city was asleep under a thin layer of fog when I heard footsteps on the stairwell. The studio lights buzzed faintly as the door opened, and the stranger walked in like he owned the air around him. He was tall, sharply dressed, and silent, the kind of silence that made space bend. I froze, brush midair, the scent of paint mixing with something darker, leather, smoke, and power. His gaze found me before I could speak, and in that single look, something inside me faltered. "Miss Vale," he said, his voice a low rumble that felt like it came from somewhere beneath the floorboards. "I'm told you can see people better than they see themselves." He didn't smile, didn't blink. "I try to," I managed, my pulse tripping over itself. "You wanted a portrait?" He nodded once and took off his coat, revealing a tailored black shirt that clung to a body sculpted from discipline, not vanity. His movements were measured, deliberate, a man accustomed to control. When he sat in the chair by the window, moonlight slid across his face like it recognized him. Strong jaw, a faint scar beneath his lower lip, eyes the color of dark glass, unreadable and endless. "Do I call you Mister?" I asked, needing to fill the silence. "You don't need to call me anything," he said. "Just paint." Something in the way he said it, command laced with curiosity, made my stomach tighten. I tried to steady my brush, to focus on the lines of his face, but every time I looked up, he was already watching me. Studying me with the same intensity I used on him. The air grew heavier with every glance. Minutes became hours. The only sounds were the ticking clock and the whisper of bristles against canvas. At one point, I noticed his hand, a faint tattoo beneath the cuff of his sleeve. A sigil, maybe, or a crest. When I reached to adjust the lighting, the shadows caught the metallic glint of a gun holstered under his jacket. My breath hitched. He noticed. "Does it bother you?" he asked quietly. "I've painted soldiers," I lied. "I'm not a soldier." His tone carried something darker, something that made my brush tremble. "Then what are you?" He leaned back, eyes tracing the unfinished portrait. "Someone who doesn't belong on canvas." That night blurred between curiosity and fear. He said little, yet his silence spoke volumes. There was something restrained about him, as if every word he didn't say was a weapon locked behind his teeth. And yet, when I caught him looking at the portrait, something flickered. Not pride, not arrogance, sadness. When he finally stood to leave, I realized my hands were shaking. "How long?" he asked, nodding toward the painting. "A week," I said. "Maybe less." He slipped an envelope onto the table. The weight of it made my throat tighten. More than I'd ever been paid for a single piece. "Finish it," he said, his voice a low command. "But don't show it to anyone, no matter who asks." And before I could respond, he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke and danger. That night, I couldn't sleep. His face burned behind my eyelids. The scar, the eyes, the way the air felt charged when he looked at me. I tried to rationalize it. He was just another client, but deep down, I knew he wasn't. The next day, the city buzzed with whispers. A shootout downtown. 3 men dead. Police blocking off the docks. The name that kept surfacing was one I'd never heard before. Vincenzo Moretti. A man the papers called untouchable. The name sent a chill through me for reasons I couldn't explain. That evening, I returned to my studio to find the door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside, heart hammering, scanning the shadows. But nothing seemed out of place. Until I noticed the painting. Someone had touched it. The brush I'd left beside it was on the floor, and the faint outline of a handprint smeared through the wet paint on his face. And there, beneath the smudge, a note had been slipped under the easel, written in elegant, almost beautiful handwriting. "Stay away from him if you value your life." I stared at the words, pulse roaring in my ears. Him. I didn't need to ask who they meant. Because as the city lights flickered outside, I realized the man I'd painted wasn't just a stranger. He was the story every whisper in the shadows was afraid to tell. And I had just painted the face of the mafia boss everyone feared. The same man whose eyes still haunted me every time I closed mine. When I looked back at the portrait, the paint was still wet, but his gaze seemed alive, as if the man on the canvas knew exactly how deep I was already in. I didn't go to the police. I should have, but the warning note felt heavier than any law could handle. Stay away from him if you value your life. The words echoed every time I tried to paint, eat, or even breathe. I told myself to forget him, to finish the portrait, collect the money, and move on. But forgetting a man like Vincenzo Moretti was impossible. He'd been in my studio for less than 3 hours, and still, the air hadn't cleared since he left. It lingered, like smoke after a fire that refuses to die. The following nights were sleepless. The city outside my window pulsed with sirens and whispers, and my mind kept circling back to that scar on his lip, that unreadable calm. I tried to focus on the painting, but each stroke felt like trespassing. His eyes, cold, dangerous, magnetic, were watching me even in pigment. I should have stopped, but something about finishing his face felt necessary, as though completing it would release me from whatever spell I was under. By the 3rd night, I was halfway through when someone knocked at my door. I froze, brush suspended midair. It was past midnight. No one came here that late. The knock came again, firmer this time. "Ilara Vale?" A man's voice called through the door. My heart stumbled. "Yes?" "Delivery." I hesitated, then unlatched the lock. A tall man stood in the hallway, his build almost military, his eyes cold and impersonal. He handed me a sealed black envelope and turned without a word, disappearing down the stairs before I could ask anything. Inside was a note, short, precise, written in the same elegant handwriting as before. "Finish the portrait. Do not speak to anyone. Someone is watching." No signature, no explanation. I sat on the floor, staring at it until dawn. When I finally looked out the window, a black car was parked across the street. 2 silhouettes sat inside, motionless. I told myself it was coincidence. But when I came back hours later with coffee, the car was still there. By evening, my nerves were splintering. I decided to finish the portrait that night, to end this connection before it consumed me. I painted until my fingers cramped, until the colors stopped feeling like colors and started feeling like memories. His face came alive on the canvas, sharper, realer than before. The line of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to hide storms behind glass. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed onto the paint. That was when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Alara Vale. The voice was low, familiar. You shouldn't be working this late. My throat went dry. Mr. Moretti? A pause. Then a quiet exhale that sounded almost like amusement. You remember the name? How did you get my number? You left it on the invoice. I didn't know what to say. His voice was softer than I remembered, but it carried the same gravity, as though he could make the air listen. There was a note left in my studio, I blurted. Someone told me to stay away from you. Did you? He asked. No. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear faint background noise, an echo of music, laughter, maybe clinking glasses. Then his voice dropped lower. Good. The line went silent for a few seconds, and when he spoke again, the softness was gone. Alara, you're not safe. Not until the painting is done. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone unless it's me. What's going on? I demanded. Why would anyone— Because you saw me, he cut in, voice like a blade. And now, they know you did. My stomach twisted. Who's they? He didn't answer. Just said, I'll send someone to watch the studio. Don't leave until I tell you to. Then the line clicked dead. The silence that followed felt colder than the fog outside. For the next 2 days, I barely left my apartment. The same black car stayed parked across the street. The same figures inside, like statues carved from shadow. When I finally worked up the courage to confront them, they were gone. Replaced by a different car, different silhouettes. Whoever they were, they wanted me to know they were there. On the 3rd day, I decided I couldn't live like this. I packed the portrait carefully, intending to deliver it to his address myself, end this madness, and move on. But when I stepped outside, a hand closed around my wrist. Don't scream, a voice whispered. I spun around. A woman, maybe in her 30s, dressed in black, her expression sharp with urgency. You need to listen to me, she said. You don't know who you're dealing with. I think I do, I said, trying to pull free. You think you do. Her grip tightened. Vincenzo Moretti doesn't paint portraits for fun. You're a message, Alara. To someone else. What are you talking about? Before she could answer, tires screeched at the corner. A black SUV roared into view, headlights cutting through the fog. The woman's face went pale. Run, she hissed, but it was too late. The SUV stopped beside us, doors opening in perfect sync. 2 men stepped out, suits, guns, no hesitation. They didn't speak. One of them grabbed my arm, yanking me backward toward the car. Let her go, the woman shouted, pulling a gun from her jacket. A shot rang out, deafening, final. I screamed as she fell, her gun clattering against the pavement. Before I could process what happened, a voice from inside the SUV cut through the chaos. Enough! It was him. Vincenzo stepped out, calm amid the violence, his presence swallowing the street's panic whole. He looked at the woman's body, then at me, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes I couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of a conscience buried too deep to matter. Get in the car, Alara, he said quietly. I shook my head. You killed her! His jaw tightened. She would have killed you first. I don't believe you. Then don't, he said. But you'll be dead before morning if you stay here. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight. But when I looked past him, I saw more shadows moving in the fog. Men watching from rooftops, alleys, like wolves closing in. Vincenzo's eyes found mine again, steady and unflinching. You have 10 seconds to decide. Something in his tone made my pulse falter. I stepped forward before my mind could catch up. He opened the car door himself, his hand brushing my shoulder as I climbed inside. The door shut with a heavy finality that felt like the world locking behind me. As the SUV pulled away, I looked out the window, at the lifeless figure on the street, at the studio fading in the distance, at the city I no longer recognized. Vincenzo sat across from me in silence, his expression unreadable. The gun holstered at his side glinted under the dim interior lights. Finally, he spoke, voice low and controlled. "You should have stayed away." I turned to him, anger and fear battling in my chest. "You told me not to." He looked at me then, really looked, and something flickered behind the cold exterior. And that's the problem. The car sped through the fog, heading deeper into the city's shadows. Somewhere between the fear and the heartbeat in my throat, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding since the night he first walked into my studio. It wasn't just danger pulling me toward him anymore. It was him. The car didn't stop for nearly an hour. The city fell away behind us, replaced by winding roads that cut through the hills like scars. I sat in the back seat beside Vincenzo, trying to steady my breathing while the man in the driver's seat said nothing, eyes fixed ahead. The air in the SUV was thick, heavy with tension and gunpowder, and the faint scent of him, smoke, spice, something dangerously human. Every few minutes, my eyes darted to the door handle, measuring the risk of jumping out at full speed. But one look at the reflection of the gun in the tinted glass reminded me I wasn't free. Not yet. Finally, we turned through iron gates and into a long, curving driveway. The house that appeared ahead was less a home and more a fortress. High stone walls, arched windows, and guards at every corner. Floodlights swept across the courtyard as the car stopped in front of a massive oak door. Vincenzo stepped out first, his movements smooth and controlled. When he looked back at me, his expression softened just slightly. "You'll be safe here," he said. I wanted to laugh. Safe. Inside the home of the man every newspaper called a ghost, wrapped in blood. "I didn't ask to come here," I said, stepping out carefully. He didn't respond, just gestured for me to follow him inside. The mansion was silent. Every footstep echoed against marble floors. The walls were lined with art. Portraits mostly, old and regal, their eyes following me as if they knew how far out of place I was. A chandelier glittered above us, light refracting through crystal like fragments of another world I didn't belong to. He led me through a hallway and into a room that smelled faintly of old books and cedar. The walls were lined with shelves, and at the center stood a desk large enough to bury secrets beneath. "You can stay here for the night," he said. "No one will bother you." I folded my arms. "You think that's supposed to comfort me?" His jaw twitched, as though holding back a response. "It's the best I can offer." He turned to leave, but something in me broke through the fear. "Who was she?" I asked. "The woman who tried to warn me." He paused by the door. The silence stretched before he finally said, "Someone who made her choice a long time ago." That was it. No regret, no explanation. Just a wall. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the dark window. The night pressed close, heavy and quiet. I wanted to believe I was just a bystander, a painter who stumbled into something too big. But deep down, I knew better. I had painted his face, captured something in him he probably never wanted seen. And now I was here, hidden in his house, while the world outside whispered about men like him. Hours passed before I heard footsteps again. They were quieter this time, hesitant. When I turned, Vincenzo stood in the doorway, holding a glass of something dark. "You're still awake," he said. "Hard to sleep when you've been kidnapped." His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "If I'd kidnapped you, you wouldn't have your phone, your freedom, or that attitude. Then what do you call this? Protection." I almost laughed again, but his tone was too steady, too certain. He stepped closer, setting the glass on the table. "Drink. You haven't had anything since morning." I hesitated, but my throat was dry. The burn of whiskey hit my tongue like fire. "Tell me," I said quietly, "what am I being protected from?" He looked at me then, truly looked, and for a second the coldness faltered. "A man I used to trust," he said. "He wants something I have, something he thinks you can give him." "Me?" He nodded once. "Your painting." I frowned. "It's just a portrait." "To you, maybe," he said, voice low. "But to the wrong people, it's proof. Of a meeting that wasn't supposed to exist. Of a face that shouldn't have been seen." Realization struck like a cold wave. "You're hiding from someone." "I'm not hiding," he said quietly. "I'm preparing." He turned away, but I saw it then. The tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion he tried to bury beneath authority. This wasn't just power. It was burden. The weight of too many ghosts. "Who was she to you?" I asked again. "The woman on the street." His back stiffened. A warning I ignored. He walked toward the window, the moonlight cutting across his face. "You think you see me, Alara. You see the man who sits for paintings and talks in half-truths. But every stroke you put on that canvas brings you closer to something you don't want to understand." "Then explain it," I said. "I deserve that much." He turned slowly, eyes shadowed but steady. "I built my world on control. Every decision, every move, every death, mine to command. But you—" He stopped himself, as though the next words were dangerous. "You saw me before I could hide." Something inside me cracked, fear and empathy colliding. "Maybe you don't have to hide," I whispered. For a moment, his expression softened. He stepped closer, and the space between us shrank until I could feel the heat of his breath. "You think you can fix me, don't you?" he murmured. "Turn the devil human. I don't believe anyone is beyond saving." He smiled then, but it was sad, almost tender. "That's what makes you dangerous." His hand brushed against my jaw, slow and deliberate, as though testing the line between warning and desire. My pulse thundered. The world felt smaller, quieter. Just his breath, his eyes, and the impossible truth that danger had never felt so magnetic. Then a sound shattered the stillness. Glass breaking somewhere down the hall. Vincenzo's head snapped toward the door. In a blink, the softness vanished, replaced by steel. He reached beneath his jacket, pulling a gun, and motioned for me to stay put. "Lock the door," he said. "Wait." But he was already gone. The house erupted with noise, shouts, footsteps, the metallic ring of gunfire muffled by stone walls. I pressed myself against the door, every sound slicing through my nerves. After what felt like forever, silence returned. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy, approaching. "Vincenzo?" I called softly. No answer. The handle turned. I stumbled back, heart racing. The door creaked open, and then he was there, disheveled, blood smeared across his sleeve, eyes burning with fury and relief. "They know you're here," he said, breath ragged. "We have to move." "What happened?" "Someone inside gave them your name." He grabbed my wrist, pulling me down the corridor as shadows darted across the windows outside. Somewhere behind us, a car engine roared to life. The world had narrowed to the pounding of our footsteps and the iron grip of his hand on mine. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the chaos. "Somewhere they can't find you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not until I find out who betrayed me." And though I didn't want to admit it, even as fear clawed at my throat, part of me didn't want to let go of his hand. Not yet. The letter came on a rainy afternoon, slipped beneath her studio door like a secret that refused to wait. The envelope was thick, the kind that smelled faintly of money and danger. Her name, Elena Marquez was written in elegant cursive, the ink pressed deep as though carved into the paper. No return address. Just a black wax seal marked with an insignia she didn't recognize. 2 roses crossed by a dagger. She stared at it for a long moment, her pulse thudding quietly in her ears. The rain outside made the world look blurry, as if someone had painted over it with trembling hands. When she finally opened it, the scent of expensive cologne and something older, gunpowder maybe, escaped. The message was short, almost polite. Your work has reached the eyes of someone who appreciates it deeply. You are invited to an exclusive exhibition tomorrow night. Transportation will be arranged. No guests. Midnight. There was no signature, no location. Only a small silver card tucked inside, engraved with coordinates instead of an address. She looked them up, expecting an error. But it led to an abandoned district outside the city, an area cordoned off years ago after a fire destroyed most of it. No galleries existed there. No one lived there. So why her? That night, Elena barely slept. Every sound outside felt amplified. Footsteps that weren't there. Whispers that faded when she turned her head. She tried to convince herself it was a mistake, a prank from one of the art students she occasionally mentored. But deep down, something told her this was connected to him, the stranger she'd painted. Ever since that portrait, her studio had felt different. The air colder, the shadows longer. She caught herself speaking to the painting sometimes, and worse, believing it listened. By the next evening, curiosity had rotted into compulsion. She dressed simply. Black coat, hair tied back, minimal makeup. She told no one where she was going. At 11:30, a sleek black car stopped outside her building. The driver didn't speak. He only nodded when she showed the silver card. As the city lights fell away, replaced by the ghostly remains of warehouses and broken lampposts, Elena's hands tightened around her bag. The hum of the engine felt too calm for where they were headed. When the car stopped, she found herself standing before what looked like an old cathedral, its stained glass shattered, its door guarded by 2 men in tailored suits. Inside, the air was thick with candle smoke and silence. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of faces she didn't recognize, but every single one had the same strange quality. Eyes that seemed alive. And then, at the end of the hall, she saw him. The man from her painting, standing beneath a chandelier of black crystal. Very real, very alive. His suit was immaculate, his eyes a dark storm that seemed to pull her in. You came, he said softly, as if he had been waiting centuries. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me. Her voice trembled. Who are you? He smiled, and for the first time she realized how wrong it had been to think she'd ever imagined him. You painted me, he whispered, stepping closer. Now, it's my turn to finish the portrait. For a long, breathless moment, Elena couldn't move. The air between them felt thick, trembling with the kind of tension that only exists between 2 people who shouldn't have met. His voice was velvet wrapped around something sharp, and it pulled her toward him before her mind could protest. She wanted to ask again who he was, but every instinct warned her not to. The candles flickered, as though reacting to his presence. He stepped closer, his shoes silent on the marble floor, and the scent of smoke and cedar wrapped around her. You shouldn't exist, she whispered. You were just a painting. He tilted his head slightly, amused. And yet, he murmured, you painted me so precisely that I had no choice but to exist. The words landed like a spell. She could almost hear the logic twisting inside them. That doesn't make sense. He smiled faintly. Neither does art. Yet here we are. He turned and gestured toward the portraits on the walls, Hundreds of them. Men, women, all hauntingly lifelike. Their eyes seemed to follow her, pleading, warning. Each of these was painted by an artist who saw too much. Each of them captured something they shouldn't have. Their subjects were incomplete, until the artists themselves completed them. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. What do you mean, completed? He looked back at her, and for the first time she saw something ancient behind his gaze. You gave me a face, a form, he said softly. Now I need your soul to anchor it. Elena's breath hitched. You're insane. He laughed quietly. Perhaps, but madness and creation are old companions, aren't they? He stepped even closer, his voice dropping lower. I've been watching you, Elena. You have a gift that defies reason. You don't paint what you see. You paint what wants to be seen. That's why I chose you. Her pulse hammered. Chose me for what? To immortalize what should never die, he said simply. And in return, I offer you what every artist craves. Eternity. She shook her head, backing away. You're talking in riddles. He smiled, the corner of his mouth curling like a secret. Then let me be clearer. He snapped his fingers, and the room changed. The walls seemed to melt, the portraits shifting. Each canvas now showed the artists themselves, their expressions frozen in terror. Their hands reached out from inside the frames, fingertips pressing against invisible glass. Elena stumbled backward, horrified. What did you do to them? She whispered. They created beauty without understanding its cost, he said calmly. Every masterpiece demands sacrifice. Every soul trapped here believed they could paint without consequence. But you, Elena... He paused, his eyes gleaming. You've already begun, binding yourself to me. When you painted my portrait, you left a piece of yourself inside. That's why you can't stop thinking about me. That's why you came. She shook her head violently. No, I came because you tricked me. He chuckled softly. You came because you had to. Don't you feel it? The pull? The way your brush trembles when you try to paint anything else? Her throat tightened. He was right. She hadn't been able to finish another piece since that portrait. Every canvas had turned into his face. Every color mixed into his eyes. She swallowed hard. What do you want from me? I want you to paint me again, he said simply. But this time, completely. Her skin prickled. Completely? He nodded. When you painted me the first time, you left out something vital, my heart. Without it, I can walk among men, but I remain incomplete. You and only you can give it to me. And if I refuse? He smiled again, but this one didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll have to take it. The candles flickered violently, their flames bending toward him as if bowing. The temperature dropped, her breath misting in the air. She realized then that this wasn't a man. Not truly. Whatever he was, he existed somewhere between creation and damnation. I don't believe you, she said, though her voice trembled. He studied her for a moment, then raised a gloved hand. With a subtle gesture, the portrait she had painted of him materialized in front of them, glowing faintly, suspended in the air. You signed your name in red pigment, he said softly. Do you know what that pigment was made from? Her heart lurched. Crimson number 4, she whispered. He smiled. The kind that requires a drop of blood to bind. Yours, specifically. You gave me your essence, Elena. You just didn't realize it. The realization hit her like cold water. Every strange shadow, every whisper in the night. It had all started after she'd finished his portrait. She'd tied herself to him without knowing. He stepped closer until he was inches away, his voice almost tender. You can still free yourself. Paint me again and complete what you began. Do that, and I will leave you untouched. She looked up at him, her breath trembling. "And if I do, what happens to me?" He leaned down until his lips brushed her ear. "You'll live forever in my eyes." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world outside the cathedral was silent. Then, from somewhere deep in the hall, one of the painted figures screamed. It was the kind of sound that tears through your soul. Elena staggered back, knocking over a candle. The flame flared, and for a brief second, she saw what lay behind the man's human mask. Something dark, flickering, infinite. She ran. But as the cathedral doors burst open, the last thing she heard was his voice echoing behind her, smooth and certain. "You can't run from your own creation, Elena. I live in every brushstroke you've ever made." The night swallowed the city whole as I ran. Rain streaked down the narrow alleys, smearing the streetlights into trembling rivers of gold. My shoes slapped against the wet pavement, heartbeat pounding louder than the thunder overhead. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, breathless, drenched, and shaking. When I slammed the door shut behind me, the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. The portrait was waiting. It hung above the easel like a silent accusation. The same eyes that had haunted me since the day I painted them seemed to shimmer in the half-light, following every movement I made. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help it. The shadows around it pulsed faintly, as though the canvas itself was breathing. I locked every window, drew every curtain. Then, trembling, I grabbed the painting from the wall and threw it face down on the floor. The sound of the frame cracking should have brought me relief. It didn't. "You don't control me," I whispered. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was too small, too uncertain. I went to the kitchen and pulled open a drawer, searching for something sharp. Anything. My hand closed around a palette knife. The metal was cold, biting into my palm. I dragged it across the back of the canvas, slashing into the fabric until it tore apart like paper. My breath came fast, frantic, and I felt something uncoil inside me. A desperate hope that maybe this would end it. But then, the air shifted. The smell hit me first, iron and smoke. I turned the painting over, and my stomach dropped. The tear I'd made was closing, the threads stitching themselves together. The paint on the surface began to move. Literally move. Like wet blood crawling across skin. His face reformed piece by piece, colors twisting, deepening. His eyes opened. "Why?" His voice was soft, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Why do you fight me?" I stumbled back, slamming into the counter. "Because you're not real." He laughed, low and broken, the sound vibrating through the walls. "I am as real as your fear. As real as the blood you gave me." "Stop!" I screamed, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, turpentine, and splashed it across the painting. The liquid hissed as it hit the canvas. For a moment, his face blurred, the colors bleeding away. But then the smell grew stronger, burning, metallic. My hand ached. I looked down. The brush I had used to create the portrait was lying on the floor beside my feet, its bristles soaked red. Not with paint. Blood dripped slowly from its tip, spreading in delicate arcs across the wooden floor. I froze. No, that's not possible. "It's always been possible," his voice murmured, echoing through the apartment. "Creation and destruction are the same act. You can't undo what's already alive." The lights flickered. I could hear something, faint, like breathing, coming from inside the walls. I turned toward the canvas, and for a split second, I saw movement behind the painted eyes, a reflection that didn't belong to me. Then the painting spoke again. "Do you remember the first time you touched the brush?" I did. I remembered the night perfectly. The storm, the blackout, The way I'd found the brush left on my windowsill, wrapped in black silk. No one knew how it got there. I thought it was a gift. "I gave it to you," he said. "Every artist needs a tool that knows her soul." I could barely breathe. "You used me." "No," he said softly. "We used each other." Something in his tone almost broke me. Against all logic, part of me felt him, his loneliness, his yearning, as if every stroke I had painted was a confession he could read. For one terrible second, I wondered if destroying him would mean destroying that connection too. But then I remembered the faces in the cathedral, the other artists, trapped in frames, their eyes begging for release. I grabbed the brush, ignoring the sting in my palm, and hurled it at the fireplace. The bristles hissed as the flames caught, curling black and red. The air filled with a scream so sharp it split through my skull. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but it didn't stop. The sound grew until it wasn't just noise. It was language. "You can burn the tool," he hissed through the flames, "but not the bond." The room trembled, my vision blurred. Every canvas in the apartment began to shake, falling from the walls one by one. The paint on each one shimmered, pulsing like veins. I could feel something pulling beneath my skin, like invisible strings connecting me to each color, each stroke I'd ever made. "Stop it!" I screamed. "Let me go!" A low chuckle echoed. "You already belong to me, Elena. I don't need your permission." Then everything went black. When I woke up, the apartment was silent. The fire had gone out. The floor was covered in ash, and in the center of it, the brush lay unburned. Its wooden handle was smooth, clean, untouched by the flames. But where my name had once been engraved, now there was another word carved deep into the grain. Mine. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw it all away. Instead, I picked it up. My fingers trembled as I turned it in my hand. It pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. I heard his voice again, whispering just behind my ear. "You can't destroy art, Elena. You can only become part of it." My grip tightened. The window behind me reflected the faint outline of my face, pale, hollow-eyed. But when I looked closer, I realized the reflection wasn't mimicking me anymore. My mouth didn't move when it smiled. A cold shiver ran down my spine. And then, from somewhere deep inside the apartment, I heard the unmistakable sound of canvas stretching, as if something new was being painted without my consent. The brush in my hand bled again, and this time, I didn't drop it. I didn't sleep that night. Not truly. My body lay in bed, but my mind hovered somewhere between dream and waking, tangled in whispers and the faint scent of paint. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the way his gaze seemed to pierce through me, gentle and merciless all at once. The apartment had gone still, too still, like it was holding its breath with me. I thought about leaving, packing a bag and running as far as I could, but I already knew it wouldn't matter. He wasn't a man I could outrun. He wasn't even something that belonged entirely to this world. When the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I sat up. The air felt heavier than before, thick with the metallic tang of turpentine and blood. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed it, a streak of red across the floor leading from the living room to my bedroom. Paint. At least I told myself it was paint. I followed the trail with slow, reluctant steps. It ended at my easel. A new canvas stood there, clean, untouched. Except it wasn't empty anymore. My breath caught in my throat. It was me. Someone, he, had painted me while I slept. The image was so real it made my stomach twist. Every strand of hair, every shadow beneath my eyes, the faint rise and fall of my chest. It was perfect. Too perfect. But there was something wrong about it, something off in the details. The painted version of me was smiling. I hadn't smiled in days. And behind my likeness, half hidden in darkness, his silhouette stood watching. A tremor rippled through me. "No," I whispered. "No, this isn't real." But the brush, the same one that had bled, was lying beneath the easel, faintly pulsing like before. My name had vanished from the handle completely now. When I touched it, I heard him. "You made me. Now I return the favor." The voice wasn't in the room. It was inside me. A low, steady rhythm that merged with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. I stumbled back, pressing my hands against my ears. "Get out of my head!" But the sound only deepened, becoming words again. A whisper threaded with something almost tender. "You invited me in, Elena. Every time you thought of me, you gave me more space. Every time you dreamed, I drew closer." I wanted to deny it, but the truth hit me like cold rain. I had been dreaming about him. Every night since the cathedral. Sometimes he stood behind me while I painted. Sometimes he spoke words I couldn't remember upon waking. Sometimes he simply watched, always watching. The air shifted again. I turned, expecting to see nothing. Instead, I saw movement. The shadows along the wall rippled, forming the faint outline of a man. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, head tilted as though studying me. I froze. My breath hitched. "Elena," he said softly. It was him. Not from the painting this time, not from my imagination, but standing there, in my apartment, half real and half smoke. His eyes glowed faintly, colorless yet deep. He looked solid enough to touch, but every flicker of light passed through him like mist. "How?" I couldn't finish the question. "You gave me form once," he said, stepping closer. "You can do it again." "I don't want to." He smiled, sad and knowing. "Lies never suited you." Something about his tone broke me. I backed away until I hit the wall, but he didn't advance further. Instead, he reached out his hand, hovering inches from my face. The air between us crackled, static, heat, hunger. "You don't understand," I whispered. "You're destroying me." His gaze softened. "No, I'm revealing you." The words sank deep. Reveal. Like peeling away the surface of a canvas to expose the truth underneath. He leaned closer, close enough that his breath, or whatever passed for it, brushed against my skin. "You've always hidden behind your art, behind control, behind reason. But creation isn't reason, Elena. It's surrender." I wanted to look away, but his eyes held me. "You want me to surrender?" "Yes." His fingers grazed the side of my face, cool, unreal, yet electrifying. "And when you do, you'll see what I see." My voice shook. "And what's that?" He smiled faintly. "The world as it was meant to be, where beauty and ruin are one and the same." Something inside me cracked then, a small fracture that let the truth slip through. For all my fear, part of me did want to see it, to understand him, to understand why the darkness felt so achingly familiar. He leaned in, his lips inches from mine, and whispered, "You already belong to it." The air went still. My pulse roared in my ears. For a heartbeat, I thought he would kiss me. But instead, he disappeared. Just like that. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood there trembling, alone, the echo of his presence still brushing against my skin. Then I saw it. The painting of me had changed. My painted reflection was no longer smiling. She was looking directly at me now. And behind her, his hand rested on her shoulder. That was when the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the door. I froze. No one ever came here this early. I moved toward the door, every step heavier than the last. My voice barely worked when I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then, another 3 knocks, louder this time. I grabbed a knife from the counter. My hand was shaking. I opened the door just enough to look through the crack. No one. But when I turned back toward the room, my blood ran cold. There was now a third figure in the painting. Not me, not him. Someone else. A stranger standing in the doorway, painted in perfect detail. My throat closed. I turned toward the real door again. The hallway was still empty. But as I watched, a drop of red, not paint, blood, slid down the wood. And from somewhere deep in the apartment, his voice came again, soft and patient. "Don't be afraid, Elena. You wanted to create something immortal. Now it's painting you." I didn't remember falling asleep. Maybe I never truly did. The night folded into morning without warning, and when I opened my eyes, everything was drenched in that pale, colorless light that makes the world feel suspended, neither alive nor dead. My first thought was that I'd dreamt it all, the painting, the voice, the blood. But then I saw the door. The same streak of red was still there, glistening faintly like it refused to dry. The painting was gone. The space where it had stood felt empty, violated. I searched the entire apartment, behind furniture, under tables, inside the closet, as if it might somehow have walked away on its own. The only clue left was a single black feather resting on the floor beside the easel. It shimmered faintly, like oil under light. When I touched it, a sharp pain shot through my hand, as if the feather's edge had teeth. A thin cut opened across my palm, and blood bloomed across my skin. That was when I heard him again. "You shouldn't have run," the voice murmured, close but invisible. "I told you the painting wasn't just of me. It was a doorway." I spun around, my heart hammering. "A doorway to what?" "To what lies behind creation," he said simply. His voice filled the room, steady, low, and dangerous. "You opened it the moment you finished my portrait. The line between what you imagine and what is. It's gone now." I backed against the wall. "I don't want this. I just wanted to paint." He chuckled softly, and for a moment I could almost see him. A flicker of form against the light. A shadow wearing a man's shape. That's what every artist says before they realize what they're capable of. His tone shifted, quieter, darker. "Do you know who I am, Elena?" I swallowed hard. "You're a ghost, a curse, a hallucination." "I am none of those," he interrupted. "I am what remains when power is painted into being." I didn't understand, but he continued, voice heavy with memory. "Centuries ago, an artist was commissioned to paint a man, a lord who wanted immortality. The artist captured his likeness so perfectly that the man's soul was trapped within the image, but the canvas couldn't contain it. The spirit bled out, searching for another vessel, someone who could sustain both beauty and ruin. It found me. The room felt smaller, suffocating. "You're saying you're a creation that outlived its creator," he said. "And now you've done the same. You painted me into being again. You gave me a second life." My throat was dry. "Why me?" He paused. "Because you see what others cannot. You paint the truth beneath the skin. That's what called me back. I wanted to scream that I didn't want any of it, that I'd destroy every brush and canvas I owned. But some part of me, the part that still ached to understand him, kept me silent." He stepped closer, his form materializing from shadow into flesh. This time he looked more human than before. The sharp angles of his face softened, his eyes luminous and haunted. He was beautiful in the kind of way that hurt to look at. "You think this is evil," he said softly, reading my thoughts. But what you call evil is only hunger without balance. I don't take what isn't freely given. You took my sleep, my sanity, I whispered. He nodded slowly. And yet you still paint. Why? I froze. Because it was true. Even through the fear, even through the madness, I had wanted to paint again. The pull hadn't faded. It had grown stronger. He reached out, brushing his fingers across the cut on my palm. The touch was cool, almost gentle. This is not punishment, he said. It's transformation. Into what? He smiled faintly. Into what you've always been, a maker of worlds. The lights flickered again, and suddenly the walls were gone. The apartment dissolved into a sea of black. Paintings, hundreds, thousands of them, floated in the void, suspended like stars. Each one showed something different. Faces twisted in longing, landscapes bending and breaking, colors that bled into each other like living veins. What is this? I breathed. The place between imagination and creation, he said, where every artist leaves a fragment of themselves. You've been here before, Elena. Every time you lose yourself in your work. You just didn't recognize it. I turned slowly, overwhelmed. Each painting whispered. Some called my name. I felt the pull of their stories, their grief, their unfinished dreams. He stepped beside me, his voice low. This is where I live, where all art lives, once it's seen. I looked at him, at the man I had somehow birthed from canvas and color. And you want me to stay here? He studied me for a long moment. Not yet. You still have a choice. What choice? To paint one final time, he said. To finish what you began. Paint my heart, and you'll close the doorway. You'll set us both free. I didn't trust him, but I also couldn't ignore the pull inside me. That irresistible need to see the truth completed. And if I refuse? He met my eyes. Then you'll live haunted by everything unfinished. Every painting, every thought, every version of me you could have made. The darkness rippled, colors blooming like blood in water. The paintings began to spin slowly, forming a spiral around us. Choose, he whispered. I could feel the brush in my hand again, even though I didn't remember picking it up. The bristles were slick, warm. My pulse thudded in my ears. Maybe this was madness. Maybe I had already lost my mind. But my hand moved on its own, sketching lines into the dark air. His eyes, his face, his heart, forming stroke by stroke from nothing. He watched silently, a strange reverence in his expression. You see me, he murmured. You truly see me. The painting glowed between us, alive, beating. And then, too late, I realized what I'd done. The glow turned violent. The light exploded outward, tearing through the void. I screamed as the force knocked me back, colors burning into my skin. When I opened my eyes again, he was gone. But so was my reflection. The world returned. The apartment, the canvases, the cold morning light. But in the window's glass, where my face should have been, there was only his. He smiled faintly. Thank you, Elena, he whispered through the reflection. Now, you're the art. The window went dark. When I opened my eyes, the room didn't move with me. The world felt painted, still. My breath fogged in front of me, and for a terrifying moment I thought I'd stopped existing. The bed beneath me was the same velvet I remembered from last night, the same scent of sandalwood and smoke lingering in the air. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The mirror across from me reflected the room, the bed, the draped curtains, but not me. I blinked once, twice, nothing. My reflection was gone, erased like an unfinished sketch. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I stumbled from the bed and reached for the glass, pressing my fingertips against the cool surface. The mirror didn't respond with touch. No smudge, no warmth. Just emptiness where I should have been. It felt as if the world had swallowed me whole and spat out only the illusion of my presence. "This isn't real," I whispered. But the room didn't answer. I turned, searching for signs of him. Luciano. His name had become both curse and prayer on my tongue. But the suite was empty, save for a single object placed on the desk. A gold frame. Inside it, my unfinished portrait. Only now, the eyes were no longer still. They moved. They watched me, following every breath I took. The brush strokes shimmered faintly under the low light, alive in a way no paint should ever be. I wanted to destroy it, to tear it apart, but some invisible weight held me back. It was like an unseen thread tied from the canvas to my chest. When I stepped closer, I felt my pulse sync with the rhythm of the painting. One heartbeat. One breath. One prison. A knock echoed. Then his voice, low, steady, as if he'd been standing there for hours. "You shouldn't look at it yet." He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Luciano wore black again, but his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. Still, power radiated from him, the kind that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. "What's happening to me?" I asked. The words shook, barely holding together. "You crossed into something you don't understand," he said, his gaze flicking toward the portrait. "When you painted me, you opened a door. When you stepped through it last night, you didn't leave empty-handed." I wanted to scream, to accuse him of doing this to me, but deep down I already knew he wasn't lying. There had always been something strange about him, something ancient in the way he moved, the way shadows seemed to follow him like loyal soldiers. "Am I dying?" I asked. "No." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "You're becoming." "Becoming what?" He didn't answer right away. His hand brushed my shoulder, and the touch was both warmth and static, like being pulled between worlds. "You belong to the canvas now," he said finally. "The frame holds your reflection because your soul no longer trusts mirrors. It's safer there." I backed away, shaking my head. "You're insane." "Maybe," he murmured. "But so are you for painting me." His eyes darkened, the faintest ache in them. "You called me into this world with your art. Every stroke was an invitation, every line a whisper that reached further than you knew." My knees weakened. "I didn't mean to." "I know." His voice softened, and that gentleness was worse than any threat. But now that connection runs both ways. My world and yours aren't separate anymore. The moment you saw me for who I am, you became a part of it. I wanted to run, but my body refused. My pulse slowed to match the faint flicker of light inside the portrait. "How do I stop it?" I breathed. "You can't," he said, "but you can choose how to live with it." He took my hand, pressing it against his chest. Beneath his heartbeat, I felt something else, like the echo of 1,000 lives. "Do you think power comes without cost?" he asked. "You've seen what I am. The painting is your protection now, not your curse. As long as it remains whole, so do you. And if it breaks?" He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear in his. "Then you fade." We stood there in silence, the truth settling between us like ash. Outside, thunder cracked over the horizon. I pulled my hand back, unable to look at him. "You should have let me go," I whispered. He shook his head. "I tried, but you kept painting." There was pain in his voice, real, human pain. He turned toward the window, his silhouette cut by lightning. "The men who attacked you last night weren't mine," he said quietly. "They belong to the Rossi family. They know what you've done, what you've become, and they'll come for you. To them, you're leverage. My stomach tightened. Then why tell me this now? Because they're already watching the house. The lights flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed us. I could hear movement outside the door. Soft, deliberate. Like footsteps pacing in the hall. Luciano's jaw tensed. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his tone shifting from gentle to lethal in an instant. "Luciano!" He pulled a gun from his jacket, his eyes glinting like steel. "Don't speak. Don't move." The door burst open before he finished the sentence. Gunfire exploded through the room, shattering the mirror, the frame, everything. I screamed, but the sound didn't come from my throat. It came from the painting. When the last echo faded, the portrait lay in pieces, the gold frame bent, the canvas torn. And in its place, where my image had once been, was only darkness, swallowing itself. Luciano dropped the weapon, his face pale, his voice hoarse with something like terror. "Elena," he whispered, looking around the room. But I was no longer standing there. The silence that followed the gunfire was not human. It was the kind of silence that eats everything alive. Sound, breath, reason. Smoke curled through the room like black ribbons, and shards of glass glittered across the marble floor. Luciano didn't move. He stood in the wreckage, staring at the torn remains of the painting, his heart pounding against the sudden weight of nothingness. The air still smelled of her, lavender and paint and fear. But she was gone. Her voice, her warmth, her heartbeat, all gone. Only the echo of her scream remained, still vibrating in the hollow between the frames. He dropped to his knees beside what was left of the portrait. The gold frame was twisted, its ornate corners melted into strange shapes. The canvas itself was torn across the center, a jagged wound that cut through the face he'd once seen alive. Her eyes, those soft brown eyes, were nothing but smeared shadows now. But as he touched the fabric, the faintest whisper slid through his mind. "Luciano?" He froze. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't an echo. It was her, soft, trembling, calling from somewhere deeper than sound. "Elena?" The whisper came again, clearer this time, closer. "You shouldn't have broken it." His hand tightened around the canvas, veins standing out against his skin. "Where are you?" "I don't know," she said. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "It's cold here. Everything moves like wet paint. I can see you, but you can't see me." Luciano swallowed hard, forcing his pulse to slow. He'd seen impossible things before. Blood oaths that bound souls, men who vanished into shadows, art that breathed. But this was different. This was her. He had brought her into his world, and now it was consuming her. He stood slowly, holding the canvas up to the flickering light. The edges shimmered faintly, like something alive just beneath the surface. He could see her shape trying to form, the faint outline of her hand pressing from inside. His throat tightened. "You're trapped in the painting," he said quietly. "But how?" "You told me the frame kept me safe," she whispered. "When they shot it, when it broke, I fell. It pulled me in." Luciano turned sharply, eyes scanning the room. "Then we'll fix it." "You can't fix something that isn't real anymore," she said, her voice softer, more distant. "The frame is gone. The reflection's gone. What's left of me is just paint." He slammed his fist against the wall. The sound echoed through the ruined suite. "No," he growled. "You're not just paint." He moved to the desk, his movements sharp, controlled. He began gathering the fragments of the frame, the torn pieces of canvas. Each one he placed carefully on the table. his hands trembling with fury and something deeper. Guilt. Elena's voice flickered. "Why do you sound like you're breaking?" "Because I should have told you," he whispered. "When you painted me, you didn't just capture a man. You caught a curse. My family's power. It's tied to art, to reflection. Every portrait is a contract. Every brushstroke is blood." Her silence felt heavy. "And what was I to you?" He closed his eyes. "The first thing that ever made me forget what I am." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain began outside again, tapping softly against the shattered windows. Luciano turned toward the far wall where another painting hung, one of his own ancestors. The man in the portrait looked down at him, almost mocking. "You can't keep her," that painted gaze seemed to say. "She doesn't belong here." He took out his lighter, flicking it open. The small flame wavered, casting long shadows across the room. "If I burn this," he murmured to the portrait, "will you let her go?" Elena's voice broke through, panicked. "Don't. Please. You'll destroy what's left of me." He froze, torn between rage and desperation. "Then tell me how to bring you back." "I don't know," she whispered, "but I feel something calling. It's not death. It's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you." Luciano's breath caught. He looked at the canvas again. The faint shimmer pulsed like a heartbeat. He could almost see her outline forming once more. Her face, pale but defiant, her eyes searching for his. He reached toward her. His fingertips brushed the torn fabric, and a jolt ran through his body. Sharp, electric, alive. He saw flashes then. Her painting studio, her laughter, the light that used to fall across her shoulders. Then darkness. A hand reaching from the void. Her hand. "Pull me out," she whispered. Luciano grabbed the edges of the frame and held tight. The air around him crackled, the walls trembling. Shadows twisted like serpents, whispering in a language older than time. The chandelier above shattered, raining crystal shards around him, but he didn't let go. Then, for one breath, he saw her face press fully against the canvas. Her lips moved, and he heard her say his name one last time before the painting burst into light. He fell backward, blinded. When his vision cleared, the portrait was gone. In its place was only an empty frame, no paint, no color, no life. Just silence. He rose slowly, his chest heaving. "Elena?" he called. Nothing. The air felt still, too still. He turned toward the window, his reflection faint in the cracked glass. And there she was. Not behind him, in him. Her reflection stared back where his should have been. Her lips moved inside the glass, her voice trembling through the air. "You said the frame keeps me safe," she whispered. "So I came to the only frame that couldn't break. You." Luciano's throat closed. He reached for the mirror, his hand trembling. Her palm met his from the other side, warm against the cold surface. "I'll find a way," he said. "I swear to you." Her eyes softened. "Then hurry," she said, "because they're coming for you next." And with that, her image faded, leaving only his reflection again. But the warmth of her touch still lingered on the glass. The mansion was silent again, but Luciano could feel her everywhere. Every breath he took felt shared. Every shadow carried her warmth. When he moved through the dim hallways, he caught her reflection in the corners of mirrors, in the shimmer of wine glasses, in the gleam of metal. She lingered in the world between, alive, but not living. Bound to him by the same darkness that had cursed his family for centuries. He had tried to bury that legacy long ago, but now it demanded payment. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city drowned in fog. Luciano stood by the tall window of his study, staring into the night where the moon hung heavy, pale as bone. On the desk before him lay the torn fragments of Elena's painting, carefully gathered and sealed beneath glass. He had spent the last hours combing through old books, grimoire pages smudged with soot, names written in Latin, and inked blood signatures from men long dead. He had sworn he would never open these pages again. But for her, he would. When the clock struck midnight, he whispered an old name. The room darkened as if something had exhaled all the light. A shadow peeled away from the wall, forming the shape of a man in a black coat with no face. The air turned cold. "You swore you'd never call me again," the shadow rasped. "I lied," Luciano said. A low chuckle filled the room. "You always were your father's son. What do you want, Don Moretti?" Luciano's jaw tightened. A soul was taken into the frame. "I want it back." The shadow tilted its head, amused. "Ah, a woman." Luciano didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. "You know the law," the thing whispered. "A reflection cannot return unless it's traded for another. One must take her place." "I'll do it." The shadow's form rippled like smoke. "You'd bind your soul to the frame? If it brings her back?" A pause. Then laughter. Cold, delighted, cruel. "You mortals never learn. Very well. But blood is the key. Yours must be offered under the full moon. And remember, Moretti, once you open the veil, it will not close again." Luciano didn't flinch. "Tell me what I need to do." The shadow stepped closer, its voice now a whisper in his ear. "Go to the lake behind your estate. When the moon is highest, cut your palm and let your blood fall into the water. Speak her name 3 times. If she answers, the frame will awaken. And if she doesn't? Then she never loved you enough to return." The words lingered like poison. Then the shadow vanished, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and iron. Luciano stood there for a long time, his pulse steady but his hands shaking. He turned toward the glass dome that held the painting fragments. Elena's faint reflection flickered within it, her voice soft as breath. "You shouldn't do this." "I've already decided," he said quietly. "Luciano." Her tone carried both fear and tenderness. "If you trade yourself, who will protect you? Your world isn't kind." "I don't need kindness," he said. "I need you." The wind rose suddenly, rattling the windows. It was almost as if the house itself objected to his words. But Luciano moved with purpose now. He took the glass case, wrapped it carefully, and carried it through the long corridors of the estate. The moon followed him, pale and watchful. When he reached the lake, the air was sharp with night-blooming jasmine. The surface of the water shimmered like black glass, perfectly still. He set the case down on the stone steps, rolled up his sleeve, and drew a blade from his belt. The same blade his father had used to seal his first blood oath. He hesitated for a breath, then dragged the edge across his palm. Blood welled up, bright and alive under the moonlight. He let it fall into the lake. Ripples spread outward, and the reflection of the moon fractured. "Elena Marquez," he whispered once. The ripples deepened. "Elena Marquez." The water began to glow faintly, the silver light shifting to red. "Elena Marquez." The last cry tore from his throat, filled with equal parts pain and devotion. The wind roared, and the ground beneath him trembled. The painting fragments glowed inside the glass dome, the torn fabric mending itself as if time were rewinding. Then, her voice. "Luciano." He turned sharply. She stood on the water, her body translucent, her hair moving like mist. Her eyes were luminous but sorrowful. "You shouldn't have called me," she said. He stepped forward, water rising to his knees. "I told you I'd find you. If you take my place, you'll lose yourself." she warned. You'll become what you feared most, a reflection with no world to belong to. I lost myself the day you painted me, he said, his voice breaking. She reached out a trembling hand. If you cross, you can't come back. Then we'll both stay. Her breath hitched. Luciano. He took her hand. The moment their fingers touched, the water around them exploded into light. The lake burned like silver fire, the moon vanishing behind a storm of color. Luciano felt the pull immediately, the drag of something ancient and endless, pulling him downward, demanding more. His veins burned, his chest seized, but he didn't let go. Her hand was the only anchor that felt real. She was crying now. You fool, she whispered, voice breaking. You were supposed to live. I am, he murmured. With you. Then the light consumed them both. When it faded, the lake was still again. Only the moon remained, pale and watching. On the stone steps, the shattered glass case was empty, except for one thing, the restored painting. It now showed two figures instead of one. Her face, serene. His hand, resting against hers. Both alive, both trapped inside the frame. The world outside was quiet. But if anyone stood close enough, they would swear they heard a heartbeat echo from within the painting. Two, in perfect unison. The mansion was silent that night, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every chandelier flickered under the weight of what was about to end, or begin. Elena stood before the canvas that had taken months of her life, her heart pounding with the rhythm of every brushstroke that had brought her here. She could feel him behind her. Adriano Moretti, the man who had once ordered deaths with a nod and now waited in silence, his fate hanging between her trembling hands and the unfinished painting. The war outside was collapsing, families retreating, men laying down weapons for the first time in years. But inside these walls, another kind of war still raged, the one between love and vengeance, trust and survival. She turned slightly, her voice breaking the silence. If I finish it, there's no going back, she whispered. Adriano's eyes darkened, that same storm she had seen the night they met. Danger painted with devotion. It was never about going back, Elena, he said. It's about surviving what we've already done. His words hit her like the echo of every truth she'd been afraid to face. She was no longer just the artist who painted strangers. She was the woman who had seen a monster become human, and loved him anyway. The painting in front of her was more than his portrait. It was his confession, her forgiveness, and their curse. Elena lifted the brush one last time. Each stroke carried a memory. The night he'd first walked into her studio, the warmth of his voice when he called her Cara Mia, the blood on his hands he'd tried to wash away with silence. She painted not with pigment, but with moments, layering sorrow over tenderness, shadow over light. Outside, thunder rolled like gunfire, but inside the mansion, time slowed. When she finally stepped back, the portrait was alive. Adriano stared at it as though looking into a mirror that showed both his sins and his salvation. You've painted me as a man I don't deserve to be, he said quietly. No, Elena replied. I painted you as the man you could have been if the world hadn't broken you first. He moved closer, his hand trembling as he touched the edge of the canvas. And what about you? He asked. Who did you paint yourself to be? She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Someone who finally understood that monsters don't scare me anymore. Losing myself does. A single gunshot cracked the air outside, a reminder that their enemies were still out there, clawing at the last threads of power. Adriano turned toward the sound, but Elena stopped him. Let it end without another death, she whispered. Please, for once, let the world stay quiet. He hesitated, a lifetime of instinct warring against a single plea. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. For the first time, the infamous Don Moretti surrendered. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. Elena stepped closer until their foreheads met, their breaths mingling in the dim light. "When they come for you," she murmured, "they'll see the man I painted, not the one they feared." "And when they come for you?" he asked, voice breaking. "I'll already be gone," she said softly. "Painters disappear when their work is done." Morning bled through the curtains like a reluctant confession. The war was over. Not because peace had been declared, but because love had finally exhausted its weapons. When Adriano awoke, the easel stood empty. The portrait was gone, and so was she. Only a faint scent of turpentine lingered, mixed with something softer, jasmine and regret. On his desk, a folded note rested beside a single brush dipped in dried crimson. He unfolded it with unsteady hands. "You once said I painted souls. I think I finally understand why. Because some souls can't be saved, only remembered. Don't look for me, Adriano. You've already found what I saw in you." He pressed the note to his lips, eyes closing as the first rays of dawn caught the gold frame where her portrait had hung. The war had ended, but her absence was a wound no peace could heal. Years later, whispers spread through the art world about a painting that moved when no one was watching. A portrait of a man with eyes full of sorrow, standing in a room that no longer existed. Some said the painter's ghost still wandered nearby, touching the canvas whenever the light fell just right. Adriano never confirmed the rumor. He had disappeared from his empire, leaving behind only silence, a burned mansion, and a name that faded like smoke. But in a hidden gallery by the sea, behind a locked door, one portrait remained, her final masterpiece. The man in it seemed to breathe, his gaze forever fixed on something beyond the frame. And if you stood close enough, you could almost hear a woman's voice whisper through the paint. "Love me where the light can't find us." The legend of the portrait lived on, not as a crime nor a miracle, but as the final truce between two souls who had turned war into art. The gallery was small, hidden between weathered stone walls that faced the restless sea. Inside, light drifted through cracked windows, touching one painting, the only one that remained. It showed a man standing near an open window, his eyes dark and tender, as if he was waiting for someone who had already gone. The plaque beneath it read only, "For him." No one knew who painted it. The curator said she disappeared the night the portrait was finished, leaving the brush still wet with color. He claimed the air sometimes smelled of jasmine when the tide rose, her perfume carried back by the wind. One winter evening, a young woman entered. She wore a red scarf and paused before the painting. Her reflection merged with his in the glass, and for a moment, the candlelight trembled. "He looks like he's waiting," she whispered. "Maybe he isn't anymore," the old man said. When she left, the candle flickered out, and in that quiet, something in the portrait seemed to shift. His eyes softer, his lips curved with peace. By morning, the gallery stood empty, yet the scent of jasmine lingered, and on the cold glass, two faint handprints faced each other, one inside the frame, one out. Those who pass the gallery now say they sometimes hear the faint echo of a woman's voice and the murmur of a man's reply, carried by the sea wind. Not words, just a promise. Always.